The young and the restless spoilers. It was supposed to be an escape, not just from confinement, but from the crushing weight of accusation, betrayal, and the chilling possibility that he might not make it out of France alive. Nick Newman had never been the kind of man to sit still while others dictated his fate. He was a fighter, a protector, a Newman through and through. But this time, his instincts betrayed him. His bold move to break free from the suffocating control of Carter, the enigmatic and increasingly robotic enforcer under Kane Ashby's watch, had gone terribly wrong. What was meant to be a desperate dash to freedom became a bloodbath in slow motion. Somewhere between the cracked hallway tiles and the garden gate flanked by a single armed guard, Nick had been caught. There was no grand confrontation, no thundering exchange of fists. Just a flicker of steel in the dim light, a searing line of pain slicing through his side, and the sharp thud of his body collapsing onto stone. In the cold, echoing silence that followed, he realized two things: he was bleeding out, and no one was coming to save him in time. Or so he thought. Sharon Newman had sensed something was wrong the moment the hallway fell silent. She had been pacing, her nerves shredded from the days of captivity, watching Nick descend into frustration and impulsiveness. She'd known he was planning something. He always did when the odds turned grim. But when she turned the corner and saw the trail of blood, her heart stopped. In that instant, instinct took over. Sharon didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She ran. She followed the smears, the droplets, the broken signs of struggle until she found him. Crumpled against a hedge, blood pouring from his side, his eyes unfocused. Again, she might have whispered under her breath, though her soul was already in full triage mode. How many times had she been here before, fixing the broken, pulling Nick back from the edge, cleaning up after disasters not entirely of his making? She dropped to her knees, pressed her scarf to the wound, whispered words meant to calm but mostly meant to keep herself steady. "Stay with me," she said, again and again, not knowing if he could hear. And then Sally arrived. Sally Spectra had not planned to become a combat medic that day. She had followed a hunch, a bad feeling, a sixth sense that something was going wrong at the estate. After all, it was France, the air was tense, and nothing in Genoa City's orbit ever unfolded without emotional bloodshed. But what she walked into was far worse than she imagined. She saw Sharon hunched over Nick, blood pooling beneath them like an accusation, and all pretense fell away. There was no time for jealousy, no time for memories of who loved whom when. This wasn't about rivalry. It was about survival. Sally rushed to help, ripping fabric from her blouse to reinforce the makeshift dressing. Her hands were steady, her face pale, her breathing short, but her mind was focused. Together, the two women, one from Nick's past, one from his maybe future, fought to keep him alive. But the danger hadn't passed. Carter was still out there, somewhere in the estate or perhaps watching from the shadows. His eyes, always calm and unreadable, had followed them for days. Whether it was he who delivered the wound or whether it was another hidden player in the labyrinth, Sharon and Sally didn't care. Their priority was getting Nick to safety. Every hallway became a battlefield. Every footstep an echo of threat. Together, they half-carried, half-dragged him back through the estate's garden entrance, navigating blind corners, dodging staff, evading security systems that were once designed to protect but now felt like traps. Sharon whispered encouragement. Sally barked directions. Nick slipped in and out of consciousness, his hands cold, his breathing shallow. He'd lost too much blood. He needed a hospital. But even that felt like a fantasy. They made it to a guest villa, barely. Sally secured the door while Sharon stabilized Nick on the couch. They had no supplies. No medical training. Just urgency, adrenaline, and a stubborn refusal to let him die. And in that pressure cooker of fear and memory, something shifted. Sharon, once so composed, let the cracks show. Her hands trembled as she dabbed his forehead, her voice shook when she said his name. Sally, usually sarcastic and bold, turned quiet, her eyes locked on the wound as if willing it to close through sheer force of will. And Nick, even through the fog, heard them both. Felt them. Loved them, in different ways, for different reasons. These were the women who had seen him at his best, his worst, and everything in between. And now they were both saving him. Together. Meanwhile, the villa's upper levels were in chaos. Victor Newman had gotten word that something had happened. His son was injured, maybe dying, and Carter was missing. Nikki, shaken from her own brush with death and growing increasingly disgusted with Kane's manipulations, demanded answers no one could give. Amanda was silent. Billy was furious. Audra, caught between seduction and strategy, was nowhere to be found. Only Kane remained still, watching it all unfold with the unsettling calm of someone who still believed they had control. But even he couldn't ignore the sound of sirens in the distance, the chaos of shouting staff, the questions now screamed instead of whispered. As the ambulance finally arrived, too late but just in time, Sharon and Sally stood side by side, covered in blood that wasn't their own, exhausted beyond comprehension. Nick was loaded in, his pulse faint but steady. They followed, not as rivals, but as guardians of a man who had nearly died in the name of justice. And somewhere behind them, Carter watched from the shadows, his mouth curling into something that might have been satisfaction or regret. The escape had failed. But Nick Newman had survived. Barely. And now, the war had truly begun. The wind howled as it whipped through the jagged edges of the mountaintop, screaming like a ghost through the pines and bending the air with a cold sharpness that cut straight to the bone. The villa, a once idyllic estate perched above the cliffs of southern France, had become a prison. A forgotten corner of the world where cell service vanished, roads turned to rubble, and cries for help were swallowed by silence. And in that silence lay Nick Newman, slumped against a moss-covered stone wall, his blood seeping into the gravel beneath him, staining the earth in widening pools of red. His eyes fluttered as the sky above him blurred into shadow, and every heartbeat became a distant echo, fainter, slower, fading. Sharon knelt beside him, her hands covered in his blood, her mind slipping in and out of reality. The smell of iron in the air, the stillness of his chest, the coldness of his skin, it all shattered her carefully constructed emotional armor and hurled her back into the darkest corners of her memory. The hostage crisis. The screaming. The sense of helplessness. The cold steel of a gun barrel pressed against her temple. All of it came rushing back, not in whispers, but in screaming torrents of color and sound. Her vision narrowed. Her breath shortened. She wasn't here, she was there, back in the nightmare that never truly left. And yet, as her hand trembled on Nick's shoulder and she whispered his name through clenched teeth, she forced herself to focus, to breathe, to act. Because this wasn't just trauma. This was now. And Nick wasn't a memory. He was dying. Just feet away, Sally's spectra pressed her entire weight against the makeshift bandage she had formed from a torn shirt and the inner lining of her coat, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. Her fingers were slick with blood, her jaw clenched as she leaned into the task with a desperation she didn't quite understand. She had always been the type to face crises with fire, not fear. But this? This was something else. She could feel Nick slipping away, feel the pressure of his life literally draining beneath her hands. And in the back of her mind, even as she barked orders and tried to keep Sharon from spiraling into a full-blown breakdown, a whisper of doubt curled around her heart like a snake. How did I get here? She wondered. How had a business trip turned into a battlefield? How had she, a woman who had clawed her way through scandal and betrayal, ended up here? Elbow deep in blood, trying to save a man who might not even want to be saved by her? Because that was the brutal, silent question hanging in the air between them. Sharon and Sally, kneeling on opposite sides of Nick's broken body, were not just two women in crisis. They were two parts of his past, his heart, his fractured life. And now, with death hanging in the balance, they were forced to put aside every resentment, every quiet insecurity, and every whispered comparison. Because the man they loved was dying, and only their combined strength could keep him tethered to the world. But even in this shared mission, tension lingered. Sharon, battle-worn and steady, had the knowledge. She knew Nick's rhythms, his patterns, the sound of his breath when he was scared, the way his hands twitched when he was about to lose consciousness. She had lived through the storms with him, seen the highs and the very lowest lows. She had mothered his children, buried one beside him, and forgiven him more times than she could count. Her connection to him wasn't just romantic, it was cellular, generational, cosmic. And that, in moments like this, was a kind of power. Sally could feel it. She watched Sharon's hands move instinctively, watched her whisper Nick's name like a prayer, and for a moment, it hurt. Not because Sharon was stronger or braver, but because Sharon knew him in ways Sally never could. Their love had been newer, less lived in, more volatile. It had flickered brightly, burned hot, and then vanished like a match in the wind. Sally had tried to move on, told herself that Nick didn't fit into the version of her life she was building, but here she was, weeping into the night as she fought to save him. And that said more than any goodbye they'd ever shared. Nick groaned softly. His head lolled to the side. For the briefest moment, his eyes opened, glassy and unfocused, but when they locked onto Sharon's face, something softened. He tried to speak, but his lips were too dry, his voice too broken. She leaned in, brushing hair from his face, whispering that it was okay, that he just had to stay with her. His fingers twitched, reaching for her hand. Sharon caught it instinctively, her own tears now falling silently. Behind her, Sally swallowed a lump in her throat and reached for his other hand, giving it the same desperate squeeze. For the first time, Sharon didn't pull away. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because in this moment, they were not rivals. They were Nick's only chance. The women who loved him, one from a time long past, one from a fire still smoldering, working as one heartbeat. They were still stranded. No signal. No road. No one knew they were here. Carter had made sure of that. If he was the one who orchestrated this, if this was his final punishment, to leave Nick dying between the two people who cared for him most, then he had nearly succeeded. But nearly wasn't good enough. Sharon had regained control of her breathing. Her panic had dulled into focus. Sally had pulled the pressure dressing tighter and now started rummaging through her bag for anything to stabilize him, painkillers, water, anything. Nick's pulse was faint but present. The two women built a makeshift sled from a broken wooden gate and a curtain rod they found near the shed. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't smart. But it was something. And slowly, inch by inch, they pulled him toward the tree line, hoping to find a ridge where a passing car or helicopter might see them. The cold deepened. Nick drifted again. Sharon called his name over and over. Sally whispered stories from their time together. Her voice breaking, her memories short and panicked. Nick, somewhere between this world and whatever came after, heard them both. Felt them. And in that liminal space, a truth began to form. Not a choice. Not a decision. Just a truth. The woman he would always return to when everything else failed. The woman who grounded him in grief. And the woman who reminded him he could still burn. One gave him gravity. One gave him fire. But which one gave him life? His lips parted again. He tried to speak. Sharon leaned closer. Sally held her breath. He mumbled a name. It was soft, fragile. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps it was neither. Perhaps in that moment, dying and drifting, Nick had chosen not with his mind, but with his soul. And as the rescue finally arrived, hours too late, but not too late, the final question lingered in the icy air. When a man faces death, who does his heart call home?